lie, Stossel! You lie all the time!
A mob can be an ugly thing.
I saw Bridget Bishop with the devil.
In the past, mobs killed people they said were witches and heretics. Today, they still kill people with whom they disagree.
Mobs are always dangerous, destructive things.
Tonight, we focus on American mobs.
Liberal policies promote mobs because liberals crawl on the mob.
Get off this campus. We don't want you here.
The Koch brothers and their cronies.
Well, I think they should be in jail.
This is private property.
Mob rule. That's our show tonight.
And now, John Stossel.
Today, the worst mob in the world is clearly ISIS. Their fanaticism reminds me of the threat posed by the Nazis 80 years ago. If we talk about mobs, little compares to the Nazis or ISIS. But this show is about American mobs. They're not as deadly, but they do plenty of harm. We start with political mobs. Did you know that the Democratic Party activates mobs, depends on mobs, coddles mobs, publicizes and celebrates mobs? That's what Ann Coulter's book Demonic is about. She says a liberal mob endangers America. Come on. A mob?
Yes. The way they gin up their base with the slogans and the repetition, Bush lied, kids died, and you have the image of Paul Ryan pushing the old lady in the wheelchair off the cliff. Republicans, the party of Wall Street. All these sorts of slogans. Republicans are terrible at slogans.
Republicans have drill baby drill, secure the border,
I think
peace through strength.
I think those actually mean something, unlike Bush lied, kids died. There are more steps involved. To say that this is, Bush's fault and Enron's fault and it was rich people or Wall Street that did this. There's a difference in, I don't know how to explain that other than I don't need any more background other than secure the border. We want the border secure. That's not a slogan.
So it's a sloganeering mob. It's not a violent mob.
No, but it's much more than that. It's the images that are very important. And all of this is described, as I describe in my book, post the French Revolution, where all of this came from, where the Nazis and Mao and Stalin and
from
Castro.
The French Revolution.
That was the first real manifestation. There is no connection between the French Revolution and the American Revolution. They were just peasants running around
The French Revolution
people.
is like the Democratic mob.
Much more like that in the sense that it's always to the barricades. We're Occupy Wall Street. The worship of rulers, which you absolutely do not see on the right. Nobody worships George Bush. And I don't say that in a bad way. We just take it in a more rational way.
Obama.
The way they worship Clinton. You had liberal women writing articles about their sex dreams about Obama and Clinton. I promise you, no conservative ever had a sex dream about George Bush or Ronald Reagan.
But go back to the French Revolution. The American Revolution wasn't a mob?
Not at all. What do we celebrate in our revolution? The Declaration of Independence. And that was after years of appeals to King George, explaining to the world, using God as our ultimate judge, we deserve independence now. It was the most thoughtful. I mean, they were the biggest chatterers about a revolution. They were writing tracts, and Christian ministers were giving sermons. Not at all what the French Revolution. They were running around.
We did have the Boston Tea Party.
I'm glad you mentioned that. The Boston Tea Party was not celebrated for 50 years. It was highly controversial at the time. Benjamin Franklin demanded that we repay the India Tea Company for the lost tea. And even Paul Revere and Sam Adams, who were involved in the Boston Tea Party, were very careful to replace the lock that was broken. Paul Revere punished, one guy took some tea for his own personal use. He punished the tea partier who took tea for his personal use, yet and still that was not celebrated. What was celebrated was the Declaration of Independence, the Liberty Bell, which was rung to declare the First Continental Congress, the founding of our country. There are endless tracts you had. I mean, only Thomas Paine's was only the most famous of them. There are books of Christian sermons defending the American Revolution. It was a thought-out logical revolution, a small step from the liberty that we were used to, and it founded the most free and prosperous nation in the history of the world that other countries would do well to emulate. Whereas the French Revolution, all of the founders ended up guillotined themselves. They went straight to a couple of monarchies, another dictatorship. They didn't get anything resembling a republic for another 80 years. No, they are completely different, American and French revolutions.
And the French Revolution is like the Democratic Party.
The slogans, the images, the black and white extremes. We either worship you or we hate you.
When I went to the Occupy Wall Street protest, because the progressive mob clearly thinks everyone is entitled to free stuff.
I've heard you on TV. I know that you lie.
We need the government to take care of us.
Government should take care of you.
Yeah, that's how it should be.
Republicans don't do that much.
No, they do not. Republicans have to talk about things like, we're going to respect private property. That doesn't get somebody running to the barricades and threatening to guillotine the other side.
Progressives argue it's your fellow Republicans who are the mob. Here's a Democratic National Committee ad.
Desperate Republicans and their well-funded allies are organizing angry mobs. Their goal? Destroy President Obama and stop the change Americans voted for overwhelmingly in November. They've called out the mob.
And I want to know, why are you people ignoring his birth certificate?
Call the Republican Party. Tell them you've had enough of the mob.
It's worth pointing out that the first people to shoot down the birth certificate was American Spectator, Sweetness and Light, my newspaper, Human Events. It was conservatives who took it down. You know who started that rumor? Hillary Clinton, when she was running against Barack Obama.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so it's that of course, even that starts on the left. And yeah, there's still a few, but all of the spokesmen were, it never came up on Fox. No one on Fox ever pushed the birth certificate thing.
How about the drug war hysteria?
I am perfectly calm in my opposition to the legalization of drugs.
Anti-abortion protesters blowing up clinics.
Okay,
Doesn't
let's
happen
take.
often.
No, it very rarely, and I will say on that, we worked through the system on that. For 20 years, pro-lifers have worked to elect Republican presidents who promised to appoint Supreme Court justices who would overrule Roe v. Wade just to allow us to have democracy on that one issue. For 30 years, we have not been allowed to vote on abortion, not to vote 40 years. If you're going to suppress democracy in this underhanded way, yeah, you're going to have some people who are going to react. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that is not the same as trying to get your way on something that is decided democratically and the way our founders set it up through the Constitution.
Thank you, Ann Coulter. One area where I think she's definitely right is that the left acts like a mob when they get hysterical about climate change. Here's what happened to a libertarian who had the nerve to go to a climate protest and hold up a sign saying, fossil fuels are good.
Excuse me. Excuse me, this is private property. This is private property. This is mine.
Because I've criticized global warming hysteria, Robert Kennedy Jr. calls me a corporate toady who lies. In fact, Kennedy wants to jail skeptics like war criminals.
Do I think they should be in jail? I think they should be.
I think it's the alarmists like Kennedy who are part of the ignorant mob. But Tyson Slocum, director of Public Citizens Energy Program, says I'm clueless about this.
Well, I don't think you're clueless, but I think we've got a minority fringe. There's no debate within the scientific community. The science is settled.
What do you mean? What? The science is settled about what? Yes, climate changes, but that anything we're going to do about it is going to make a difference?
Absolutely.
That's not settled.
Absolutely. I mean, CO2 emissions are a huge variable in determining the Earth's climate, and they're up 40% since the Industrial Revolution.
They're up, but it's not settled that that's going to cause a big problem.
The science is pretty clear that unless we do something about that concentration of greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to have problems of species extinction, of issues with drought, of ocean acidification. So reasonable people can have a debate about what the policy prescriptions are to get to a cleaner future and whether or not clean, innovative technologies face improper barriers in the current market structure. it is frustrating that we continue debate about the science of climate change. That doesn't excuse irresponsible comments. In a democracy, we need all people to have a civil discourse.
So you agree your side sometimes gets mob-like?
All sides do. You know, the left, the right have fringes that throw stones and toss bombs, and that's inappropriate in a civil society like ours, John. What I want to have is a debate about how we can move our country forward, create jobs, and have a cleaner environment and a better climate.
Well, you can't create jobs if you have subsidies that take money from poor people to give them to your cronies in the windmill business.
We've had huge price drops in rooftop solar.
If the prices are so low, then get rid of your subsidies.
Well, the issue here is I think that solar can compete with no subsidies.
So let it compete.
But the problem is you have utilities whose business it is to sell you and I electrons. If I'm all of a sudden producing my own electricity from my rooftop solar, I'm no longer buying those electrons.
Too bad for them. They can't stop you.
Well, they can. In fact, in about 20 states, we're seeing laws to try and stop what's known as net metering. All net metering does is it doesn't provide a subsidy. It says if I take the financial risk to install rooftop solar, I should be allowed to sell excess electricity back into the grid. The utility has to buy my excess power. It's about market fairness. The utility is forced
to buy it? You call that fair?
Well, right now I'm forced to buy what the utility is selling. Why can't I compete with it?
You can put your panels up and go off the grid and support yourself.
You can, but there's a lot of folks living in cities that are dealing with the local regulations set down by the state, and the local utility is very influential.
Let's go back to your saying I'm part of the fringe.
I wasn't calling you fringe, John.
Well, I am one. I'm one who says you people are out to lunch, totally. And to say that this is going to be a big problem compared to ISIS and real problems we have is just childish. And the idea that what we're doing now, if all of us buy electric cars, that would make any difference when China won't and India won't, is just silly.
I don't think it's silly. I agree that the United States cannot solve this unilaterally. But we do live in a global community, John, and I think it's important that we're taking some modest first steps.
You say this is urgent. We face irreversible damage. Let's just put up the chart we have of the predictions versus what's happened so far. Mm-hmm. Because the IPCC's climate models have all been wrong. Temperature is supposed to go up, hasn't.
Well, what's happened is the growth rate has moderated. These models have had some issues of accurate predictions, but this isn't a death knell for U.S. industry. In fact, I think it's a massive opportunity.
I think they're a mob. Thank you, Tyson. To join this argument, please follow me on Twitter at FBN Stossel. Use that hashtag #MobRule, or like my Facebook page so you can post on my wall. We want to know what you think. Coming up, the mob against the Koch brothers, a rape culture mob, the Buy America mob. And next, when there were riots in Ferguson, who was the mob? The protesters or the police? Convict and send those killer cops to jail. Those protesters were angry because police killed both of these men. Watching the protests, many Americans call these people the mob. But some people call the police the mob.
There's 12 of you. There's 12 of you on him. There are 12 people around one person.
The police sometimes do overreact. In Ferguson, they showed up with all kinds of heavy equipment. Some pointed their guns at peaceful protesters. So who's the mob? The protesters are, says former police detective Harry Houck. No, the police are, says Nomiki Konst. She's a former Democratic congressional candidate who joined some protests. Nomiki, the police are there because we want safety, protection.
Sure.
How are they the mob? I mean, occasionally there's an issue, but it's rare, right?
It's not as rare as we think, and it's definitely not as rare in communities where communities of color, underprivileged communities, where there is a lot of injustice and there is racial prejudice.
All right, there is some prejudice. There are some bad cops. I mean, they have enormous power. A few of them will do bad things. But your side is blocking traffic. That just hurts innocent people.
Well,
that's just a mob.
This is a very serious issue, and people aren't paying attention, and they haven't been paying attention for generations.
Everybody has a right to protest. but there are certain rules and regulations you've got to follow to protest. There were thousands and thousands of people going home from work. They spent a hard day. It's already tough enough driving in New York or wherever you're from, all right, to have to deal with that kind of thing. And you're actually making more enemies than your friends.
But what about the abusive police? I mean, it changes you to put on a police uniform. I did it for stories, and people react to you in a different way. You feel powerful.
There are get over that.
Hundreds of thousands of police officers in the country. Some will be jerks and bullies.
Exactly. You know, the number is like 10% of any profession out there is
That's
bad.
a lot, 10%.
All right? That may be a lot, but to put a blanket over the police department and say that they are inherently racist, especially white police officers.
But nobody's saying that.
Well,
Nobody's saying that all of the police officers are doing that.
What do you say about this? Watch the woman in the dark shirt on the left side of the screen.
An officer in a white shirt appears to punch her in the face without warning.
This was in Philadelphia, and the police officer was fired, but then he used the police union appeal process to challenge that. He testified that the woman refused his order to drop a bottle of beer she was holding. He claimed he was trying to swat the beer bottle out of her hand when her foot went out from under her because she stepped on a can. It sounds dubious to me, but an arbitration board then reinstated him. And Harry, cops rarely get fired because the union protects them.
Listen, this is the way our system works. I'm sorry, you know, if he convinced people that he should be back on the job.
But this is happening in Oakland, it's happening in Philadelphia, this is happening in Maryland, this is happening all over the country.
There's a lot of video out there.
There are even instances where there was a woman who was using a video, and because the unions have so much money and they're able to appeal and they can pay for these lawyers, they said that the woman was wiretapping, so they couldn't use that video.
So the union is the mob.
Yep.
Now,
I think
go for your other
the union boss.
unions?
Well, I think that all unions need to have accountability, and I think that all organized. It is our system.
This is our system, and not only can the police use the system, and they have their rights, just like somebody else has rights to use the system.
When you're hurting another human being, you know, people trust their police. They trust their police, and they have an awesome amount of power. But when that trust starts to be violated, you're going to have a community issue there.
What about the trust on your side? The Occupy Wall Street protesters, you supported that.
Yes, I
but
did.
They were provoking the police, spitting on them, throwing things at them.
That was also at a time when the police were pepper spraying them, when they were beating them.
But that came second. The protesters started it.
It's a result of what WS did.
Just like you can't blanket all officers, you shouldn't blanket all protesters. I was a protester. I was peaceful.
Fair enough. Thank you, Namik.
Thank you.
Eric. Next, rape on campuses and my adventure with the anti-free speech mob.
Get off this campus. We don't want you here.
Rape culture is a huge problem on college campuses.
A rape culture that we need to really deal with. Sexual assaults are at epidemic levels across the country.
There's a rape culture. I hear that a lot, but the author of Who Stole Feminism, a book that says a group of zealots claim to speak for all women, says this rape culture charge is hysteria from a mob of bullies, and that's author Christina Hoff Sommers. So explain.
It's not an epidemic, and we do not have a rape culture. The idea of a rape culture means everything in society is reinforcing it and making it seem as though it's, you know, it's a legitimate thing to do. Of course that's not true.
The best recent example of the media mob feeding hysteria is this Rolling Stone article, which said at the University of Virginia, men routinely assault women. The article got lots of attention, but then what?
It was an absurd story, and the author, the Rolling Stone author, it's not that she made it up, but she believed a young woman who was telling a tale. It turned out to be a hoax.
She wanted to believe.
The hysteria around campus assault, the false information, the misinformation has been building for so long that we've reached a point where people are willing to believe anything. And that story was so implausible from the beginning. Any sensible person would have to doubt the way the story was told, and she didn't even get real genuine corroboration. She didn't really check her facts, But for several days, people in the media just believed it and publicized it and anguished over it.
It spread. And last year, the president added to the hysteria about a supposed culture of rape on campus.
It is estimated that 1 in 5 women on college campuses has been sexually assaulted during their time there. 1 in 5.
1 in 5. We hear that a lot, but how believable can it be? At the allegedly horrible University of Virginia in 2012, 0.46 sexual offenses were reported per 1,000 students. The next year, after lots of publicity about alleged rape, the number rose to 1.2. But it would have to be 200 per 1,000 students to make the 1 in 5 claim from the president true. Christina, the activists say, well, that's because most sexual assault isn't reported, and that's plausible.
The Bureau of Justice Statistics has done meticulous crime surveys and finds the figure is closer to 1 in 50, not 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. You can get what appears to be an epidemic if you ask a non-representative sample of people some vaguely worded questions.
Yeah, they are vaguely worded, right?
Yes.
Like, have you ever been brushed up against?
The CDC did a study, and they called it sexual violence. If you said yes, has anyone ever pressured you to have sex by telling you tales or making you feel guilty? And that counted as violence. So they use these very broad definitions. The CDC? Yeah, I still don't understand how this passed as serious research, yet people people believe it. It's almost as though when students arrive at college, they're divided between potential survivors and potential rapists.
I once got a taste of the progressive student mob when I tried to do a 2020 story on the new definition of rape, because when I was in school, rape meant clear physical force. I don't argue that's the best definition, but today young men are called rapists if they have sex with a woman who later says, I was drinking, I didn't mean to give consent. That happened at Brown University, and a freshman boy was driven out of school because of that accusation. So I went to Brown to try to just ask students about it.
Get off this campus. We don't want you here.
I'm just trying to educate myself and other people with me.
I did a politically incorrect thing.
What's allowed?
To spark debate, I questioned the activists' broad definition of sexual misconduct.
There's appropriate behavior. We can't hear you with these people trying to drown us out.
When some did want to speak, the demonstrators righteously shouted them down.
So, can I ask you why you're screaming that?
TV hype! Rape is not TV hype!
Kept screaming, so I couldn't interview people. Eventually, they just ripped out my microphone cord. So this is a mob that doesn't even want to discuss the truth.
And history is one long example of the dangers of combining misinformation with moral fervor. And young women are bearing this label that they are survivors, when what happened to them, almost anyone with an ounce of common sense would describe it as something else. Panics do not lead to, they don't shed light. They create just confusion, and they cover up serious cases of abuse.
Thank you, Christina Hoff Sommers. Coming up, buying American. Most of you, perhaps, most Americans think it's a good thing, but it's not. But you better not say that to the mob.
I think you should go away.
I think that you should go away. Somewhere for 15 years, you should have saved enough money so you're not.
Americans prefer products that are supposedly made here. A poll found a majority are willing to pay more for that. And watching media, we're often told we should buy things
made in America. I think as a country, we should all focus on buying American.
Buy American-made products, which puts other Americans to work.
Scott Paul says buying American will absolutely put Americans to work. He's president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Economist Don Boudreau says buy American campaigns are just stupid. What do you mean?
It's economic ignorance. If you buy American, you spend more money, and it doesn't create more jobs. It doesn't raise American wages. It doesn't help Americans at all. It makes Americans poor.
That doesn't make sense to people.
Yeah.
If you buy American, I'm giving somebody a job in America.
Yeah, you have to ask, what do foreigners do with the money they earn when they sell things to Americans? They buy things from Americans, or they invest in America, both of which help Americans, both of which create jobs, both of which raise American wages.
And by allowing the free trade, everybody gets the best price, and it makes us all better off.
We get to specialize in what we do best, and we let the rest of the world specialize in what they do best.
Scott, I would say most economists say this: free trade lifts just about all boats.
No question about it, but I will suggest this, another point of view. Buying American recirculates money in our own economy that gives other people additional opportunities. Now, if something is bought and the profits head back to China, in some cases, those firms are owned by the Chinese government. And Lord knows what the Chinese government is going to do it.
Yeah, Don, I don't want my money going to some state-owned communist firm in China.
Well, with respect, this is a myth. Even communist firms, what do they do with the dollars that they earn? They can't spend dollars in China. Dollars can be spent only in America or invested. That's the only thing they can do with them. The very same thing that you and Scott do with your dollars. Spend them in America or invest them.
Well, you economists are losing this argument with the politicians because there's law after law. The stimulus bills specified no funds made available may be used for a project or public work unless all the iron, steel, and manufacturing goods are produced in the U.S.
I would call those laws raise the prices that taxpayers have to pay laws.
Yeah, you're ripping me off.
Yeah. I don't think so. We've had these laws on the books for hundreds of years.
Doesn't make them right.
And you have none other than Ronald Reagan to thank for the fact that we have Buy America
provisions. Doesn't make it right.
If we're going to make public investments, let's make them here. That means our companies will be more profitable, our workers will have better paychecks, and that's going to benefit communities, John.
I think they'll be less profitable if they have to buy steel and iron from us, and ours isn't as good or costs more.
Well, we make the best steel in the world. Look, the theory of free trade is nice, but the reality is that we're competing against other countries that heavily subsidize their industry. And
great. They rip off their taxpayers, and I benefit.
I want a bigger share of the pie.
But we get a bigger share of the pie when governments do that. We Americans are the beneficiaries. We get stuff for free or at a lower cost. That's a good thing for America. The pie's made larger at their expense.
American companies do try to promote themselves, saying, "We buy American."
Made in the USA. Walmart's making a $50 billion commitment.
You happy?
Look, if Walmart is doing this, this is kind of groundbreaking because I would argue that Walmart is largely responsible for a lot of the offshoring we've seen in manufacturing. They drove a lot of jobs to China.
It's just a gimmick fed by... This is like less than 1% of their business over the next 10 years.
Now, on that we agree. I think that Walmart recognizes, as you indicate, John, there's some public perception that people want to buy American.
Here's another campaign, Don, and this... You know, you buy American apparel, sweatshop free because it's made in America. Your free trade puts people in sweatshops.
Well, in fact, that's a good thing. If those workers didn't have those sweatshop jobs, they'd be working on farms, on subsistence farms. They'd be even worse off. So if you really want to help third world workers, buy from sweatshops.
The reason I included this subject in a show titled Mob Rule is that the Buy American advocates do often look like a mob to me. Kennedy and I went to a union rally in Philadelphia once where she had the nerve to suggest that free trade works better than just buying American.
Why don't you want to build America to be the best America can possibly be?
I think you should go away.
I think you should go away.
I'm questioning your Bill of Rights.
That's not a fire engine. That was the mob using a siren to drown us out and then later to block our camera. You approve of this?
Look, Buy America policies have support not only from men and women who are in labor unions, but also from Ronald Reagan. And Abraham Lincoln built the Transcontinental Railroad, put a steel mill in the middle of Colorado because he realized there would be some benefit to America from doing that. So Rick Perry signed a bill in Texas to make sure that their waterworks would be made in America.
They're right.
But it's
because they're Republicans.
It's not just labor that supports this.
The fact that politicians do it doesn't make it right, even if those politicians are from the GOP.
Thank you, Don. Scott, coming up, the mob versus those evil Koch brothers.
The name Koch has become a four-letter word.
Did you know that these two men buy politicians?
Their money, their power, fuel the growing inequality.
The name Koch has become a four-letter word, taking a terrible toll on democracy.
A lot of people on the left hate the Koch brothers. And Jim Dean wants government to pass new laws to limit their influence. Dean's the brother of former presidential candidate Howard Dean and chair of a group called Democracy for America. So you want everyone to have democracy, but not the Koch brothers?
I think the power should be in the hands of the American people, and I think it should be a level playing field. We should get money out of politics. I think spending $1 billion on any side of the aisle is basically crowding out the voice of the American people.
What if the Koch's done that makes you mad?
Well, I mean, they have their politics, which I happen to disagree with, and they have certainly influenced the political process when it comes to environmental regulations and regulations that affect the businesses that they're in, which is primarily oil and gas and a few other things. But you could say this about a lot of other folks. You know, the Koch brothers, of course,
but
the poster boy.
But the focus on the left, with the mob, is against the Kochs. There have been death threats. They get lots of death threats.
Well, there are
samples that I say we kill the Koch brothers in the entire family line. Let's drag them out. Let the hangman do the deed. If I had a chance to murder a Koch brother in cold blood, I would surely take it. People jump out of bushes with cameras. They hound them.
Yeah, well, we don't exactly advocate for violence. So I just want to be clear about that. But the Koch brothers are the poster boy for everything that is wrong in politics because they spend so much money and because their views are a little extreme, like getting rid of Social Security and getting rid of environmental laws that protect communities.
But let's break it down.
Sure.
Social Security is going broke.
The math works for another 20 years, and it was, if not
20 years.
It has been one of the best social programs we've ever had.
The Kochs don't want to get rid of all environmental rules. They like the clean air rules. They just say, enough already. It goes too far.
Well, they've been convicted of a felony in violation of environmental rules.
They run a huge company. Every
which they
big
litigated
has
for years and years. They spend a lot of money, of course. I mean, they've just announced they're spending almost $1 billion, and that makes them a lightning rod for a lot of folks that want to get money out of politics.
I don't know that they announced it. It's said that they and their affiliated groups will try to spend $1 billion. Yep. Of course, Hillary may spend that, and her charity has $2 billion.
Yes.
But when you say they spend so much, let's look at what people spend. Sheldon Adelson spends a lot, $93 million. The Koch brothers, $60 million. Michael Bloomberg, who gives it mostly to Democrats, $13 million. Okay, let's add this, the news cycle, Tom Steyer, the big environmental activist who you like, $73 million, more than the Kochs. Compare that to the unions, almost $2 billion. Your side dwarfs the Kochs. What are you complaining about?
Well, if it's billionaire versus billionaire, that is not helpful. It doesn't matter whether they're on your side or whether they're on the other side.
The left isn't screaming at George Soros or Tom Steyer.
We would, you know, George Soros and Tom Steyer would gladly get money out of politics and gladly support campaign finance reform.
Really?
Yes, they are. They would.
Because they love government, and then government would be in charge of all the spending.
It's really because they believe that money corrupts the political process.
Let's look at the spending. I think most Americans assume Republicans are richer and spend more, but if you look at the numbers from the last presidential election, the Democratic Party and the Obama campaign spent slightly more than the Republicans.
Well, I think that's the first time in my lifetime. We don't like it when Democrats play the same game.
Regarding the Koch brothers, I should disclose that I've spent time with both David and Charles. In the past, they've paid me to speak at a few of their events. I gave the money to charities. I like both of them. I think they're doing something wonderful. David's the more visible brother. He lives in New York City. He once ran for office, and he appears in the society pages. Charles stayed in Kansas, where he runs the company. He grew it more than 100-fold, and that's a good thing. That's real wealth creation, jobs for people and products that we want. And he preaches free markets. He's against subsidies, even for his own company. He'd get rid of them if everybody else would. You should like this guy.
While wealth creation may be a good thing, and I don't dispute that, I do not think that that entitles anybody to control the outcome of the political process.
The Koch brothers are pro-immigration, anti-drug war. They want less defense spending. They just got praised by Attorney General Holder for their campaign to jail fewer people and have criminal justice reform. Why is the left so mad?
The Koch brothers represent the ones that are donating. They're the folks that are donating by far the largest amount of money. They are.
But they're not. The unions devote much more money to this.
$1 billion is $1 billion. And the unions, by the way, I would question that statistic on the unions because most unions.
It's from the Huffington Post.
Okay, but nonetheless, the unions are hardly a singular force. And the Koch brothers themselves are a singular force. They represent a small family that is an advocate for their oil and gas business, which, as you've mentioned, has grown a great deal.
It's not just oil and gas. They make Dixie cups, toilet paper, airbags, napkins, towels. I like those things.
That's true. But again, they should be citizens just like everybody else. They shouldn't be controlling the political process, and yet they are. They are going to
control it. They lose half as many fights as they win. Isn't it kind of mob-like when members of Congress attack individuals? Jim's mob blames them for everything. The majority leader blames them for climate change.
They are one of the main causes of this. Not a cause, one of the main causes.
Destroy Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, etc. Bring us back to the 1920s.
This is what threatens democracy.
John Boehner doesn't do things like that about private individuals.
I think their presence in this with the $800 million or the $1 billion does threaten democracy. That is the biggest beef that I've got with them. And I don't think it is mob rule right now for people to be upset about that.
Thank you, Jim. Coming up, the mob that keeps kids from liking school.
Punch you in the face and push you in the dirt because this is a teacher.
Friday through Sunday only at Joseph A. Bank.
You could call me a hypocrite for doing this show criticizing mob rule. After all, I pander to the mob. I do everything I can to get a mob to pay attention to my ideas and, ideally, agree with them. I live by mob rule. I stoop to gimmicks. I dress like Uncle Sam to explain Obamacare. Obamacare's handouts to big insurance companies. Here, have some tax money. See, isn't Obamacare great? I disguise myself as a beggar to cover freeloading. Oh, thank you very much. Cool food. I drag around a ball and chain to illustrate the ideas behind the book Road to Serfdom. I do things like that because I want a bigger mob of you to hear those ideas. That's also why I do social media. I'm an old guy. I didn't want to learn how to tweet or post on Facebook, but I do this because I want to reach a mob. You could also say, since America's a democracy, America is about mob rule. If 51% of the people vote one way, that's it. Majority rules. So what's Stossel complaining about? It's democracy. That would be a valid point, except for two things. America isn't just a democracy. It's a constitutional republic. And that means that the Constitution, protects us from parts of mob rule. For example, we have freedom of religion and speech. So even if the majority doesn't like our religion or things we say, we can still say them. Secondly, while I admit that my show caters to the mob, I can't force anyone to watch. I have to persuade you. But government is different. Government is force. And that's why it's nasty when unions or environmental zealots or socialists partner with politicians to force everyone to pay more to buy American, or subsidize someone's windmills, or ban someone's political speech. The most destructive political mob may be the teachers' unions.
Get up, get down. Chicago is a union town.
Understand, this is a righteous fight. This is for the soul of public education in this city.
The soul of city public schools has been ruled by unions for years, and they've wrecked many schools. The union politician mob forces people to pay higher taxes, to shove vast amounts of money toward union leaders like these, and to some terrible teachers who cannot be fired, no matter how bad they are, or how badly their students do on tests.
1, 2, 3, 4, more than just a test score.
Good teachers get discouraged because they aren't allowed to earn the big pay they deserve or to try new ideas. The union government mob often forbids it. When charter schools finally broke the mob's monopoly and some kids finally got a good education and even liked going to school, the union mob got government to limit the number of charters. They even passed out picket signs and chanted, "Abort charter schools."
Don't be fooled, abort charter schools.
Talk like that sounds more like mobsters than teachers. And the current union boss, Michael Mulgrew, sure sounds like a mobster at the union convention last summer.
If someone takes something from me, I'm going to grab it right back out of that cold, twisted, sick hand and say it is mine.
Sounds like a mob to me. Lately, the teachers' union mob has lost a little control. There are more charters and school choice options, more parents saying, hey, schools work better when they're not under union control. When parents have a choice, when anyone has choice, it's much harder for destructive mobs to stop progress. And that's another reason to keep government limited. When the state doesn't control everything and we individuals have choices, the mob can't rule. That's our show. See you next week, again in our new time slot, Fridays on FBN.